about how you interpret the different virtual machine sizes available in Azure. So it is an interesting topic and could be overwhelming with so much of information available about the types of virtual machine Azure can offer and what it essentially important to identify the right virtual machine for your workload kind. So depending on whether it is an application, it's a database or high performance computing, memory intensive activity, storage intensive activity, you will choose that kind of family which is identified by a letter. Now let's jump into that and see what all supporting documents and tools available to play around with this size and how you can actually create a mind map of what is available in the menu so that you can pick and choose depending on the situation coming up. So to begin with, right, I will take you to and that's where you are basically going to go and search for the information. So let me say Azure VM sizes. If you go and type that, right, it basically takes you to the virtual machine sizes homepage. That's the documentation, which is official documentation for Azure. This is one area. Another important aspect of this is to find out the Azure VM selector. That's that's also a small utility available which helps you choose the right kind of VM by providing the criteria. So if you're not sure what you're trying to achieve, you can always go ahead and then use this tool. So I'm going to walk you through that as well. And last but not the least, we'll use Azure pricing calculator, which will tell us what exactly is the cost, but also helps us to see like what is the kind of, let's say, available sizes today in the market. So I have got this. Let me see if I have got anything else. I'll just clean them up so that it is only one. Okay, so we're done. So there are three things. One is the official documentation of all available virtual machine sizes, which you can get from Azure documentation. Second is the virtual machine selector, and third is the pricing calculator where you can get to see what is the cost of the virtual machine if you choose a certain type of virtual machine. So let's begin from here. So if you look into this, right, and if I just highlight this, let's say, and then I go over here and I'll show you various different aspect of it, right? So you can see that I have got something like different types of virtual machine for the different kinds of workload you can play with, right? So if I go ahead here and if I just try to draw something over here, let's say this one, you can see if you go a little down, if I go a little down, you'll find like this is general purpose. That's a category. You have the compute optimized, which means that your CPU is the focus here. You have the memory optimized, that's a RAM, which is the focus here. Storage optimized, that means the disk number of disk can be more here. GPU heavy machine, mainly for um, image analysis or deep neural network kind of work. FPGA accelerated computer network also there. HPC also available. So there are different kind of, let's say, virtual machine categories available, and each of them has got different families of virtual machine. You can see it can be overwhelming, as I said before, right? So you can see that it's a lot of information. So to make your life simple, what Microsoft has done is that they have created something called a virtual machine selector. Just remember this term, and if you search in the search engine, you'll find this page. You don't need to remember the URL. You remember this term, and it is a tool available today within the Azure documentation under the pricing section. So if you can see that, you can start from here saying that I want to select, let's say, I'll make simple general purpose workload. Okay, so I want to select, like, I want to deploy an application, maybe a website, which is sort of like a general purpose compute from my experience. So I choose that. And then you go to next, and then you say that I want to search for the range of a machine which can have CPU from 4 to 16. Okay, so you can just go ahead with the thing, and you can see that it is also highlighting here, telling you like if you increase the scope to 32, you might have more options available. So it's a live calculation which is happening here, telling you like what are the number of um, so let me reduce that to 16. I don't need more. What is the RAM you need? It's a gigabyte, so I need 1 gigabyte to, let's say, 16 gigabyte. You can see that there are 6 VMs available. So the more criteria you add, the scope becomes limited. Hence, it becomes easier for you to pick and choose from, right? And you can see that it also gives you an option for disks. So premium SSD, standard SSD, standard HDD, the conventional disk, and then ephemeral OS disk. So do you need a D drive, temporary disk, right? Which is part of the VM, that you should not store the disk card because it will not sustain the data. What kind of data disk you can add in this range? So you can filter them also. So let's see what all I can add to this. So I can select type of virtual machine, which is AMD or GPU-based machine. So you can see that with this minimal size, we do not have GPU-based machine. So AMD is fine. We have VM full performance, CPU continuously. Do you have the VM GPU enabled? So if you are doing something, you have to select that. We're not doing anything. It's just a simple application. Local temporary disk storage, right? That's, you can call it as an ephemeral disk or the D drive, which typically is cleaned up in every reboot. So you should not consider that for your data. But there are a lot of applications which might need, let's say, a lock file or file while it is running. So you can consider that, and they can be gone and they are not storing any sensitive data. So what is the data disk you want to add? So you can see that the number of disks it is telling, right? So, and it can go from 1 to 64, but the size of the disk, each disk can be different, right? So you can have, let's say, 256 GB disk or 1 terabyte disk, depending on the size of the disk you can have. If you, let's say, have 1 terabyte disk and you have 4 disks, you can also strip them together all in, and it becomes a single 4 terabyte disks. All those operating system kind of activity can be applied here. So let's say I want to only add 2 additional disks. That's all I need for my application. Security, I will just skip that. Pricing option is an option given. You want to reserve it and all these things. These are all separate conversation. I'm probably going to go and cover that in a separate session about reservation because it's a great way to optimize your cost. So I'm not saying that now. I'll go next, and then I'll see that I have got a couple of options. Now, I have seen most of the customer do use standard SSD, which is economical but also gives a better performance because SSD drives are generally better. Premium is costly, but certain workload does require better performance, so you'll be choosing premium over SSD. But I have seen mostly for the simple application, which is not writing data into the disk. Well, okay, let's put it that way. But for the databases where disk is important because data read write needs to be faster, you choose premium. For application, this is absolutely fine. Standard HDD has a limited IOPS, could be slow, and could have a limitation in terms of number of disks you can create, number of storage account, and all this stuff, right? Ephemeral OS disk is a D drive, so if I add that, it becomes 6. If I don't add it, you can see that it still has got criteria for the data disk, right? So this is standard disk for OS drive, that is C drive, okay? So you can see that here, it is telling a standard disk is getting added to the operating system, that is OS disk, which is C drive. We are not yet at the data disk level. There are specs available. At the bottom, you have got options available. This is a read only and gives you an ability like what is the maximum throughput, etc. you get. So this is important. So let me go back and stop here for a moment and show you that option. So what is the maximum disk size you can have? You can have 32 gigabit, right? It's almost like a GB, but 32 gigabit, let's call it 32,000 gigabit. Let's call it that way, almost like a 32 terabyte. Okay, so rough calculation. And then you can see that throughput is also important, and it is telling that you can get up to 900 megabits per second throughput, right? And for the premium disk. So these are all corresponding column values. So I have selected standard, so I will get a throughput of 750 megabits per second. And for the IOPS, I will get 6,000 input output operation. So if my application is not doing a lot of read write, like writing to a file in the local disk and all these things, it's also fine, right? But if it is a database, 600 may be limited, right? Then we need this. Probably we need a premium disk, which gives me more, let's say, IOPS up to 20,000. Now go to next. And then this here it comes for the data disk, right? And I'm not going to use ultra data disk. I'm not going to use premium disk SSD version 2. Not even you want to use premium SSD. I'm going to use standard SSD. And I can just say that how many disks you have to add. You can add up to 64 or more, right? So I will say that I add a disks. And here it gives me the list of options available. So E stands for standard SSD. And in the standard SSD, you can go up to 32 terabyte, 16 terabyte, 8 terabyte, 4 terabyte, 2 terabyte, 1 terabyte, 512 gigabyte, right? 0.5 terabyte. So I'll choose 512 gigabyte. So that's more than enough for my application in terms of whatever files, anything and everything they need to run. Could be too much. Maybe I will select 256. So the lower the number of gigabit I'm selecting, the lower the price it is. Okay. And you need to remember one thing in terms of when you select a disk, if you select a HDD disk, like hard disk based model, right? Not non-SSDs. That means the disk is getting stored into Azure storage account. And as per the policy or the pricing structure of the storage account, it says that whatever the actual data you are putting into that storage account is the cost you're going to pay. So even if you select a data disk of HDD type of 1 terabyte, but you only store 1 gigabyte data into that disk, you're going to pay only 1 gigabyte of cost. But in the managed disk space, which is like standard SSD or premium SSD or the ultra disk, it is decided the moment you select the size. Even if you have no data into the disk, you still are going to pay certain dollar value for that size. So you choose the size wisely. So if you're not going to use, let's say, 1 terabyte, don't choose 1 terabyte. We're going to use only 100 gigabyte, choose close to that. So let's say if my application is going to use only 100 gigabyte, I will go closer to it a little more so that I'm safe. And I say add disk. I'm going to add disk. So you can see that I have added one disk. I can continue to add more disks. So your choice of virtual machine becomes now less, 6, which has got operating system criteria as standard disk. I can also choose premium and standard both. So it's a checkbox, but I just want to make it simple. And then I want to, let's say, allow Linux only kind of operating system, and all this stuff is there. Operating system will come later. So these are the stages. And you can see that in the description, right, you will find like a little bit of information about who is who, what kind of workload you're going to put. So if you are doing it for the first time, this is sort of like a mini help for you, which will tell you like, if you are going to deploy a scenario like SAP HANA, which needs a lot of things, you'll go and use the Ultra Disk. Even the premium version 2 supports SAP HANA. You have lightweight dev test environment application. You can see that for enterprise application and dev test environment, choose standardization, and for non-critical storage for backup, infrequent access sort of things. Specs, you can see that each of the column identifies that the first one is Ultra Disk, second one is Premium SSD version 2, third one is Premium SSD, and fourth one is what we have selected, that is standard SSD. And you can see that it is giving me the same IOPS as I have chosen for the C drive, that is operating system drive. So you can connect the dots here. That disk remains the disk, right? Because it's an external entity over here. But I'm an Windows application man. So I create application in Windows. My ASP.NET website runs on IIS. So I'm going to build that infrastructure. So I select Windows and I select operating system only because I'm not going to deploy Vista, neither I'm going to deploy a SQL Server into that. It's an application. If you are doing that, you choose that. And I say next. And then region is important mainly because it is a local market. Because when you buy hardware in India, let's say, you don't buy hardware from US. You buy hardware from the local supply. And depending on the supplier market and the price and the making cost and the contract you have with those vendors, it can vary a little bit here and there. So it is important for you to decide where you want to deploy this application to, right? So what I can do, I can select India. Let's say I'm going to deploy it in India. And there are, let's say, a couple of regions. I can see that, and then I'm fine with that. And I say next. Most of the region will be there. Now, you can see that the recommended total cost is coming if you choose D4ASV. We'll come to that. How do you identify what is D4 really means? And how do you, let's say, figure out the number of RAM, CPU, etc. But you can see that D4 stands for 4 vCPU, 16 gigabyte of RAM. So, and then there is no temporary storage. Processor is AMD, and it will cost you $18 per month. Oh, sorry, $81 per month. Okay. And you can just click on the view detail to see the detail. And recommended virtual machines are like different types of virtual machines. You can see that the lowest one is selected by default and recommended for you, but you do have other virtual machine types which can be costlier, but also available to you. Now your choice is limited only to 4 types of virtual machine. Life is very simple. Okay. You can even choose to, let's say, select a different currency like GBP, or I want to know the price in pound. My bill happens in dollar, not dollar, but in pound. So I choose that, and then Azure Hybrid Benefit. I'll come to my cost saving discussion with the VM, but I will just skip it. It means on a high level, if you own a license from an operating system perspective like Windows, SQL, you can use that in cloud, and hence cloud will not charge you the hourly license cost. If you don't own any Windows license today, you can still create a Windows operating system, a virtual machine in Azure, but then the license cost will be added to your bill as an hourly license cost. If you have a Windows Server, let's say license, you can use that in the cloud, and then you don't incur paying that hourly cost. So it is that model which we talk about later, but we call it as Azure hybrid benefit. Okay, using the license in the cloud. And after that, what happens, right? You get to see that. Download results, and it opens, say, creates a nice little report for you, which means that you're now ready to share it and play around with it. Create a proposal, and you can see that it gives you multiple pages and even can help you decide what is the right thing for you. So it's a beautiful way to really browse through the options rather than going into the documentation. But the documentation is really important. We'll come to that, right? So what I have seen is the VM machine selector tool, right? So the virtual machine selector tool, which allows you to, let's say, select the right kind of virtual machine for your kind of workload. And it is free. It is anybody who has got internet can use it from the browser. After coming to this detail, you can always go and check the pricing in the actual pricing calculator, but you need to know what you are doing that and which virtual machine you are using, right? So I'm going to take you to this space, and then I'm going to open the virtual machine family 5. Now, if you observe here, it tells me D version 5 and DS version 5. S stands for SSD. So if you choose DV5 virtual machine, you can only add standard HDD disks to that. Nobody does that today. However, you can choose DSV5, then you'll be able to add the the SSD kind of disk like premium or standard into that, and it becomes much faster. So if I go ahead and click that, then it becomes this list. So you get the first one is DV5, which can add only the HDD disk, and but we are interested in this one. Now you can see that names are kind of very detailed. So it's a standard underscore, and then the the series D, and next to D, there is a number. And this number is an indication of your number of vCPU you can have in this VM. So that's how you recall. So if you say that I have this standard D4S V5, that means I have got 4 CPU in my virtual machine. Okay. And in the D series, you can see that clear math. Number of CPU into 4 is the RAM memory. So if you have 2 cores, then the memory RAM becomes 8 GB. If you have 4 core, 4 into 4, 16 becomes 16 GB. So you remember once, but then you calculate once you see the size as D4 SV5. That means it is a D series. It has a SSD capability. It is having 4 CPU, but then how many RAM? 4 into 4, 16. Okay, that's a little math you can do if you remember the logic behind it. And it is the same across all the D series VM here in this list. You can see that this is absolutely the same logic applied. However, in scenarios like SQL Server, where the license is based on the number of cores, but if you, let's say, run a SQL Server on a 4-core machine with a 16 GB RAM, that may not be the sufficient. You need more RAM. The moment you go into the higher RAM, the number of CPU increases. So SQL license will also inflate, right? It will bleed you in terms of the cost if you have more cores because it's a core-based license. In those cases, you say that I want to go with a memory optimized machine. And in that case, I will choose the equivalent of D, that is called EV5 and EV5S. And now you notice the ratio of the RAM versus CPU versus RAM. If I go a little down in the S, where If you choose a 4-core machine, you are not getting into 8, not into 4. So your number of RAM becomes 32, right? So you can see that with the limited number of core, you can get more RAM. You don't need to increase the number of cores to get more RAM. In the D series, it is into 4. Here it is into 8. So you get the both benefits of, let's say, using the SQL license based on the number of cores, but then get the higher RAM, which helps you do the better activity, right? So this is how you basically read the stuff. Now, once you, let's say, have this E4 V5 and you want to put it in the pricing calculator, what you can do is simply just type E4S and it shows you what all options you have. You get that five is always, let's say, better price point figure than 3 and 4 because it's the latest hardware. Anytime you'll find latest hardware in the same series will be less price because we probably have a better, let's say, deal from with a vendor. That's not the general rule, but in case you want to identify like what is the cheaper, you will find mostly the latest one are cheaper. So you choose that. 732 hours means that the whole of the week, 24 by 7, 365 days, not 365 days, 24 by 7, 30 days, it's going to run. Okay, so that's the monthly cost. So if you are, let's say, running a dev test environment for 10 hours in a day, you choose accordingly. So you say 10 into 5 days, that is 50. 50 into 4 weeks, that is 200. So I will run my VM not for 730 hours, but only for 200 hours. So you change the number of hours, it changes the figure, and you can also select like how many VMs you need, whether in a SQL Server or an operating system. If it is Windows, it's just operating system. It'll cost you the Windows license if you are not going to use the hybrid benefit. So I will say license included, pay as you go model, and then you see that it costs you around $92 per month. That's the cost. And you can also change the currency here from dollar to anything else which you are working towards it. So for example, I want to see Australian dollar, how much it will be. Australian dollar costs you around 138.05. And you can also save this. So whatever activity you are doing, it stays within the portal. You can download it as an Excel file and then share it with your business stakeholder. Becomes very convenient. So you don't have to really copy paste things. You basically get the ready-made Excel file. Add your own formatting over here. You get to see that it tells you the details. So I just only added one VM, but you can add the whole workload one by one into that same session, save it, keep working for multiple days, and then export it as an Excel. Get this nice looking uh, cost calculation readily available for you. And that's how you wisely select the virtual machine size, know what you need to do, what size of the CPU and RAM it needs, how do you read that, but do always refer the official documentation for any kind of doubt you may have. So search for virtual machine sizes. It will take you to this page where all those virtual machine sizes are mentioned here. You can see that it is categorized as different types of virtual machine. And then you can just go into general purpose, compute optimized, memory optimized. So compute optimized will have more RAM, so more CPU, less RAM ratio. So you'll find like F series um, is something on that line, which basically gives you an ability to select, let's say, uh, 2 CPU into 2 RAM. So it is into 2, not into 4. So D series is CPU into 4 equal to RAM. F series, CPU into 2 equal to RAM. E series is CPU into 8 equal to RAM. So you can see that here, that depending on the ratio, whether you need more RAM, more CPU, you choose the right VM. But for general purpose, it is into 4. That's the kind of in the middle, right? Between 2 to 8 in the middle, we have the 4. So we select that way. So that's how you basically choose the virtual machine size. Hope this was helpful. And this is something, an important exercise all of us might need to do. So hope you enjoyed this talk, and let me know in the comment feedback what is confusing and how you want to clarify. I'll try my best to do that. Thanks a lot and have a great day.